You've probably heard the term slush fund, and usually it's tied to something shady. A slush fund is money set aside for unofficial, often unethical, and sometimes illegal uses. If someone has a slush fund, you could say that there's something fishy going on. The word slush dates back to at least the mid-1600s, referring to the cold, wet muck that is formed when snow begins to melt. A century or two later, slush took on a new second meaning, at least if you were on a boat. Salt pork, salted pieces of pork belly, was a staple on fishing and whaling ships of the 1800s. Salt pork was a good, long-lasting protein source in an era before refrigeration. It was typically fried, and as time went on, fat and grease would build up in the cooking vats. This residue became known as slush, likely because of the similarity to melted snow. But this cooking slush wasn't just thrown overboard as waste. It turned out to be useful, as sailors used it as a lubricant and to waterproof the rigging and sails on their ships. So they kept it around, and when their whaling or fishing expeditions ended, they typically still had a large amount of slush left over. And it turned out there was a market for the stuff. Other ships could also use it to help their sailing efforts before they started cooking up their own. It could also be used by candle and soap makers. Once back on land, there were plenty of people who would gladly buy the slush off the ship's cooks or other sailors. That turned out to be a boon for the crew. Because the slush was a byproduct of feeding the crew, ship owners rarely cared about the slush itself. To them, it was waste created by the cost of doing business. So when the sailors sold off the slush, the crew kept the money for themselves. As a result, the phrase slush fund first appeared in our collective lexicon around 1839. It would take a generation or two before it gained its current negative connotation, often implying bribery or something shady.